Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 15th day of the month of Tammuz, 5780. It's the 7th of July, 2020. This coming Shabbat, we are reading a Parshat Pinchas in the book of Numbers, beginning with chapter 25, verse 10, concluding with chapter 30, verse 1. This coming Thursday, 2 days from now, is the 17th of Tammuz, Shva Esrei B'Tammuz, fast day, the beginning of the 3-week period. I'm not going to say what kind of period yet between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. I'm not saying it because usually it's described as a 3-week mourning period, avelut in Hebrew. I don't like to use that term because mourning, we mourn for a loved one who's no longer. And while the Holy Temple is not currently standing, it's not a loved one who's passed on to another world. It is the Holy Temple that belongs in our world, and it didn't pass away. It was destroyed by the Romans nearly 2,000 years ago, and it is waiting impatiently, I would imagine, to be rebuilt by us, by the nation of Israel, by the Jewish people, who have a responsibility in every generation to rebuild the Holy Temple. V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham, from Exodus 25:8, and they shall build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. And that commandment is still valid today. It, like every other commandment of the Torah, it has no expiration date. It applies to us in every generation. And in fact, our sages have said that the generation in which the Holy Temple is not rebuilt is like the generation in which it was destroyed, meaning every generation has the obligation and has the opportunity to build the Holy Temple. Now, for many generations in the deep, dark galut, the exile, the opportunity to rebuild the Holy Temple was quite slim, let's face it. But certainly in our generation, when Israel's returned to the land of Israel, and Israel is independent in its own land, the state of Israel, and we have over 7 million Jews living in the land of Israel, and the Temple Mount is in our hands, as Moltagor, the paratrooper commander, said over the field radio in 1967 when the paratroopers liberated the Temple Mount. He said, the Temple Mount is in our hands, and it has been so for these past 53 years. So certainly there has never been a generation for 2,000 years who's had the opportunity like we have, our generation, to rebuild the Holy Temple, and yet we still haven't done it. So these 3 weeks aren't mourning. We're not mourning. No. We need to be really doing some, what we call in Hebrew, cheshbon nefesh, some deep introspection. What's going on here? Why haven't we rebuilt the Holy Temple? And if the answer is, well, not enough people are interested in it, not enough people know about what the Holy Temple is all about and why it's so important. And this applies to Jews who are very, quote, religious and orthodox, and also applies to Jews who may not be religious. They may be what we call, quote, secular, and anyone in between. It applies to all of us. And if the question is, well, and if your answer is we're not rebuilding it because nobody's really into it, then why aren't we all really into it? We have to work on that. And that, of course, is what we at the Temple Institute have been working on for the past 33 years. And I'm very happy to say that I believe that temple consciousness is much greater than it has been in decades and centuries, because at last this generation, especially the youth, are once again seeing the Holy Temple first and foremost in their thoughts, in their aspirations, and in their understanding of what reality is really meant to be. And we're really not meant to be, quote, mourning for the Holy Temple till the end of time. And yes, you will ask some people, and they say, what do you mean? Every year, 3 weeks, we mourn for the Holy Temple. 9th of Av comes along, Tisha B'Av, we fast, we feel horrible. The next day we get up, go about our business, and we do it again the next year. And so on and so forth, year after year, generation after generation. But of course, that's not the way it is meant to be. It wasn't what the 3 weeks were intended for. They're intended for, like I said before, introspection and a real recalibration of who we are, what our relationship is with Hashem, and what Hashem expects of us, and what we ought to be expecting of ourselves. So, 17th of Tammuz, this Thursday, it's a fast day. It's a dawn to dark fast. It means, well, it's not a 25-hour fast like the 9th of Av is, but it is, we begin the fast in the morning. First inkling of the dawn, and we conclude the fast after the sun has set and the first stars have emerged. And it's a fairly long fast because it takes place in the summertime when the days are very, very long. 17th of Tammuz, according to the Mishnah, 5 calamities occurred to the Jewish people on this day. Number 1, Moshe broke the 2 tablets of the law of Torah. Yes, 17th of Tammuz actually is 40 days after Moshe went up to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, which we commemorate on Shavuot, the 6th day of Sivan. And 40 days later, he came down from the mount, returned to the Israelite encampment, and of course witnessed the debacle of the golden calf, which was occurring before his eyes as the Israelites were dancing around the golden calf. And so his first response was to shatter the tablets so as to basically destroy the covenant and release Israel from the obligation, from the punishment that it would necessarily incur for this horrible abrogation of the second law of the Torah, which is don't make images, don't make idols. And by doing so, he rescued his people from oblivion. But then, of course, he went back up and received another set of tablets of the law. But this was the first calamity that occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. During the first temple period, the tamid, the daily offering, ceased to be brought again. This was a prelude leading up to the destruction of the first holy temple. Second temple period, we're back to that. The third calamity, during the Roman siege. This is what the 17th of Tammuz is most famously known for. During the Roman siege, this was the day that the walls around Jerusalem were breached, leading to the destruction of the Holy Temple 3 weeks later. So this 3-week period really is the 3-week demise of the second Holy Temple, beginning on the 17th, concluding on the 17th of Tammuz, concluding on the 9th of Av. 2 other calamities which were noted in the Mishnah. Now, of course, thousands of years have passed since the Mishnah, and other calamities have also occurred on these days. But the fourth is that prior to the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Roman military leader Apostumus burned a Torah scroll in the Holy Temple, and this, of course, was a horrible desecration, and was one of the reasons. That's made the reality intolerable and led to the outbreak of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And an idol was erected in the temple. I believe that the idol that was erected refers to a first temple occurrence. Anyway, 17th of Tammuz, this coming Thursday, and it brings on a very intense period for 3 weeks, and it's intense. It's observed. It's observed by Jews who are observant. It's less observed by Jews who are less observant, but it's part of the consciousness. Observing it means minimizing our recreation, our entertainment, our levity, music. Many people don't play music for the entire 3 weeks. Some people don't play music for the final 9 days of the 3 weeks, which begins on Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of the month of Av, and other customs which are associated with Avelut, with mourning. Certainly there are no weddings during this period, and no smachot, no celebrations. Many people, like I said, will not attend any sort of public gathering, a concert or a play or something like that, for certain. And as the weeks get close, like I say, from the 9th of Av, some of these customs intensify, which is sort of the opposite, reverse of the normal mourning process, in which the first week, known as the Shiva, the 7 days after a person passes away and is buried, are the most intensive days of mourning. And then following that, there's known as the Shloshim, 30-day period, which is slightly less in intensity. And then, of course, the mourning period for a deceased loved one continues for a full year. In the case of the 3 weeks, the mourning customs become more intense as we get closer to the 9th of Av. Anyway, again, yes, we all need to be contemplating who we are, what we're doing on this earth, and what we're doing, what's our part in rebuilding the Holy Temple. And of course, it's a task not only for the nation of Israel, for the Jewish people, but for all the nations and all the people around the world who are connected to the God of Israel, who understand the significance of the Holy Temple, understand what rebuilding this place on earth that God commanded us to build, that He will fill with His imminent presence, and where we're invited as a commandment. We're invited to go there 3 times a year for the holidays, for the Chagim, for the 3 pilgrimage festivals, as well as any other time, in order to be near God, in order to visit with God, in order to be in God's presence. Of course, God's presence spreads throughout all existence. So yes, we are always in God's presence and we're always near God. But here is an expression of God's love for us, and an opportunity to actually, in a physical way, draw near to God, and really take that closeness that we always feel, that we always strive to feel, and multiply it and magnify it. That's the Holy Temple. Of course, I feel the need for the Holy Temple 365 days a year, and I feel the need for the Holy Temple 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we all should be striving for that, not just for these 3 weeks. But we will be entering the 3 weeks on Thursday, and that's what we're going to be. This coming Shabbat, we are reading Parshat Pinchas, which is the direct continuation of last week's parsha of Balak. And how did that end? And again, we're all on the same page this week. We're all on the same parsha, the Jews of Israel and the Jews of the diaspora. Last week, you in the diaspora caught up to us here in Israel by reading a double Torah, reading a double portion of Hukat and Balak. And so that 1 week discrepancy which occurred over Shavuot, because Shavuot was on a Friday and diaspora Jews celebrated also a second day on a Shabbat, so they lost that Torah reading for that Shabbat, and so they were behind us for a week for the past month. Here we're back on the same page. Parshat Pinchas, of course, Parshat Balak, which we all read last week, was about the heathen prophet Bilam and his blessings that he blessed Israel with, despite the fact that he was hired to curse Israel, and despite the fact that he was making an all-out effort to curse Israel, God placed blessings in his mouth, and upon leaving Balak, a very distraught and frustrated and angry Balak, we're told that he gave him some advice. We're not told exactly what it was. But then, right after he left, we're told that Israel was encamped in a place called Shittim, right outside of the land of Israel, right opposite the city of Jericho, and that the Israelite men began fraternizing with the Midianite women who got the smitten men involved in the idolatry of Peor, Baal Peor, which was a pretty despicable form of idolatry that the Israelite men were succumbing to. And this, of course, enraged God, who caused a plague to devastate 24,000 Israelites. And it all came to a crescendo when an Israelite man brought his consort, his Midianite consort, with him right to the in front of the doorway of the tent of meeting, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and was fornicating with this Midianite women right there. It's a horrible act of what do we call it? This horrible, despicable act, mocking all that was holy, mocking all that was sacred, and the elders and Moshe were paralyzed. They were so shocked by this behavior that they didn't know what to do. They wouldn't move. They couldn't. Not that they didn't even know what to do. They couldn't even move. And then we're told that Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood up. He grabbed a romach. He grabbed a spear, and he speared the two fornicators, the two idolaters, killing them both right there, right at that moment, and stopping the plague. That ended the plague. Wow. And that's how last week's Torah reading concluded. Very abruptly. And again, it's a shock, because one of the last things that Bilam said concerning Israel, one of the final blessings was, "How goodly are your tents, O Israel, your dwelling places, Yaakov." I think I might have flipped that. But the point is, our sages understood this as being, he was praising the modesty of the Israelite encampment, that this encampment, all these tents and dwelling places were arranged in such a way that nobody's tent opening was facing another tent openings. Nobody was literally looking into someone else's household. Nobody was minding anybody else's business. People were being modest. People were showing respect to one another. People were living properly as a nation, as a community. And then all of a sudden, this type of licentious behavior, took over. It's shocking, and it's telling. And we see it today, that societies can flip out in a moment's notice. Something happens. A weakness in society is somehow exposed, and all of a sudden, boom! There's a meltdown, and this is exactly what happened. There was this meltdown, which only was stopped by this radical action of Pinchas. And so, as we open this week's Torah reading of Pinchas, this is what the Torah itself is going to explore, the aftermath. What was this all about? We'll get started now. We're almost, we have a minute or so in the first half of the show. We'll get started, and we'll continue what we have to say and learn about Parshat Pinchas in the second half. But again, we're now in the book of Numbers, chapter 25, verse 10. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, has turned my anger away from the children of Israel by his zealously avenging me among them, so that I did not destroy the children of Israel because of my zeal. Okay? Therefore say, I hereby give him my covenant of peace, Brit Shalom in Hebrew. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him an eternal covenant of kuhuna, of priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and atoned for the children of Israel. So God now is explaining to Moshe, explaining to everybody what's going on. The backstory is, as our sages teach us, that the Israelites, you might have thought they would have been completely stunned. Here's the music. So we're going to continue this. You might have thought the Israelites would have been completely stunned and shocked and ashamed and silent. It wasn't exactly like that. We'll be right back, Templeton. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. It's Reuven here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 15th day of the month of Tammuz, 5780, the 7th day of July, 2020. We've been talking about Parshat Pinchas, this coming Shabbat's Torah reading, which begins Numbers, book of Numbers, chapter 25:10, concludes chapter 30, verse 1. Before we continue, I'd just like to make an announcement. We have a new member, a new teacher on board here at the Temple Institute, Rabbi Abba Horowitz, who is going to be teaching a series of very fascinating classes about, it's really going to range all over the place, I think, but the title and the focus is Positivity and the Holy Temple. Like I said, that gives him a nice lot of freedom there to go all over the place, and I think he's going to do that in a positive way. He's got a lot to say. He's a very dynamic teacher and very enthusiastic. We began taping today, and this week his first teaching, which is entitled Talking Directly to Hashem, will be posted. We'll have it on YouTube, on Facebook, and we're very excited about it. Rabbi Abba Horowitz lives here in Israel. He's made Aliyah about 20 years ago. He'll talk all about himself. He introduces himself in the first show, but I'll just say very quickly, he has been studying once a week with our Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, the founder and head of the Temple Institute, for the past I think about 15 years. They've been studying each week, which is an amazing merit and honor for Abba Horovitz. And so he has a lot of fascinating things to say and to share with us, tremendous knowledge and tremendous insights. Unfortunately, in recent months, he has not been able to study with Rav Ariel because of the corona, and Rabbi Ariel is in his 80s, so he is a high-risk individual. So in order not to potentially imperil his health, Abba Horovitz has been not learning with him for these past few months. Hopefully, we'll get through this corona, and he can return to his weekly learning. In any case, Rabbi Ara Horovitz and his new series entitled Positivity and the Holy Temple, and again, that title gives a hint. Positivity, he's talking about positive messages from Torah and leading a positive life through the inspiration of Torah and through the insights and teachings and inspirations of our sages, and of course how that all connects with the Holy Temple. So I invite everybody and encourage everybody to give it a listen, and we really want to hear your feedback so that we can, first of all, hopefully be encouraged, and second of all, make any adjustments or corrections in our presentation or in our style in order to best serve everybody's interest, because sharing the light and the positivity and the positive message and the goodness of the Torah is what we're all about and what we really want to do here. So if we can reach people and share these messages, we are delighted. It means we're doing our job. And if you have some insight that you can share with us as to how well we're doing that, we certainly would love to hear from you. Back to Parshat Pinchas. So, as I started to say, the people apparently weren't so much in awe or of Pinchas. In fact, our sages say that they were critical. Who is this guy? What is this guy? Gets up here and kills people? This is disgusting. This is horrible. You know what? They were taught, don't kill. Right? The 10 Commandments, don't murder. You have to say, Kol HaKavod, kudos to Am Yisrael, kudos to the nation of Israel. That they said, wait a minute, this isn't right. You can't just go killing people. Sure, a great iniquity was taking place. A great sin was happening, but you just can't kill people. But apparently, there was an exception. And so our sages say that when God spoke, this is God speaking to Moshe, saying, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, has turned my anger. He's saying, the people were saying, who is this guy? He's got... They said he was related to this one, to that one, because of Aaron's wife's ancestry, whatever. They were finding a flaw in this man's character, like, he's a bloodthirsty person. He's got some idolatrous blood in him somewhere, just making him, he's bloodthirsty. He wants blood. He wants to kill. God is correcting and chastising. He's saying, this man is the son of Elazar, who's the son of Aaron, the Kohen, the priest, Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He has turned my anger away. I was so angry. And his actions, by interceding, his actions took away my anger. It almost as if God is saying, you know what, you're shocked? I'm shocked too. God was as taken aback as the people were by this sudden action of Pinchas, known as Knaut, zealotry. And his zealotry, his zealousy that was able to not just stay the plague, but stay God's zealotry. God was so, I mean, God was being so challenged by the people's behavior that even more so perhaps than the sin of the golden calf, even more so perhaps than the sin of the spies, where there was, a sin of weakness, a turning away from the right path. But here it was a certain brazenness, a certain in your face that required a very swift and very, very, very strong response. And if it wasn't for Pinchas and his human response, then God would have, he would have engulfed the people. It's basically what God's saying. His zealotry stayed my anger because he's acted the way he did. I can't, slam dunk. I can't add to that. What am I going to do now? He stood up. He stood up and defended God's honor. He stood up and defended God's name. And people have to understand that. So we have this interesting case, this very unique case of a man who does something totally out of the ordinary and totally forbidden under any other circumstance. So it's a very thin line here. What makes this the fulfillment of a mitzvah, of a commandment? What made this a positive thing where you can't just have people getting up and defending God's name by murdering other people? This was a totally unique situation. And these totally unique situations do occur sometimes, once in a while. But again, you can't just have people rising up and taking the law into their own hands, so to speak, in order to deal with these situations. Now, one thing that we know about Pinchas, which made his action in this particular case acceptable and proper, is that he was a man of peace. And that's exactly what God says in his next line. In verse 12, he says, "Therefore say, I hereby give him my covenant of peace." Right? He's a man of peace. Only a man of peace can stand up and drive a spear through two idolatrous iniquitors in order to defend God's honor and have done the right thing. Had he been a man who had these tendencies, and this is exactly what the people had questioned, this man, just a bloodthirsty man. If he had had these tendencies, if he had had any inkling, any iota of a character, of a personality that was at all violent, then his action wouldn't have been the right action, and he wouldn't have been blessed and praised by God, and God wouldn't have made a covenant of peace with him. Of course, when God says he's the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, well, that says it all. Aaron is a man of peace. We know that. Aaron is a man of peace. So he gets this covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his descendants after him as an eternal covenant of kahuna, of priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and atoned for the children of Israel. So our question, of course, is, well, he's the grandson of Aaron. Wasn't he going to be a Kohen? Wasn't he going to be a priest anyway? And the answer is that actually, as a matter of fact, the language used up to this point has always been Aaron and his sons. And this language was used during a time when Aaron and his sons was Aaron and his four sons. Avihu, and Elazar, Itamar, what was it? Avihu and Nadav. Wow, a senior moment there. Nadav and Avihu, the two sons who died because they brought the Eshazar, the foreign fire that God hadn't commanded, to the altar. and they perished. That was on the first day of the inauguration of the tabernacle. And his two other sons, Eleazar and Itamar. And Eleazar, as we learned recently, when Aaron died on Mount Hor, that Eleazar became the new high priest, Kohen Gadol. And he had a brother Itamar, who we don't learn too much about because the main role was assumed by Eleazar. And now Eleazar's son is the next generation, which hadn't, when the Torah referred to Aaron and his sons, it was on one level of understanding, referring to him and his four sons, not to the next generation. So here, God makes it very clear that yes, this kahuna, this priesthood, extends throughout all the generations of the descendants of Aaron, and this was won by Pinchas, by his action. This action of zealotry was what gained for him and his descendants this eternal covenant of priesthood, eternal covenant of peace. Then we learn, continuing right along, verse 14 in chapter 25, book of Numbers, the name of the Israelite man who was killed, who was slain with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, the son of Salu, chieftain of the tribe of Shimon. And the name of the Midianite woman who was slain was Cosbi, the son of Tsur, a national leader of a paternal house in Midian. So this was the head, one of the heads of the tribes of Shimon, who had done this despicable act. So he wasn't just a nobody. He wasn't just a lowlife. He wasn't just a guy who lost it. He was a head. He was a man of renown. He was a man who commanded respect, and he did this despicable deed. And it's very interesting because these two brothers, Levi and Shimon, two tribes, right? One is represented in this generation by Pinchas, and one's represented in this generation by Zimri. They're the children of the descendants of the two brothers of Levi and Shimon. Levi and Shimon were the two brothers who went into Shechem when Dinah was abducted, and when Hamor wanted to marry her and make a pact with Israel, and he and his father Shechem met with Yaakov, Jacob, and his sons, and they said, "Let us join together, and our sons will marry your daughters, and your sons will marry our daughters, and we'll be one people." And the Israelites, the sons, and Yaakov agreed. And then the two brothers, Shimon and Levi, went into the city of Shechem and slaughtered all the males. We know that story. And Yaakov was very, very upset. What have you done? You acted violently. And in the bracha and the blessing that he gave his sons, he basically referred to that again at his dying day when he blessed his sons, which you read about in the end of the book of Genesis. He referred to that day, into that episode, and he said, "You're not going to get an inheritance in Israel." So here, the two sons, this is a few generations later. They are, we're talking about 3 generations later. And they were very zealous. They're zealous, right? Their act of murdering, of killing all the males of Shechem, the city of Shechem, was an act of zealotry, wasn't it? They kind of went overboard. And Yaakov was very upset with them. Now, 3 generations later, we see an act of zealotry committed by one of these two brothers, the descendants of one of these two brothers, against the descendant of the other brother. And so we see that the zealotry of Levi, when he defended the honor of his people, the honor of his sister in Shechem, was a righteous zealotry, and it's now being expressed by Pinchas, who is also defending the honor of his people when he speared when he took a spear and drove it through Zimri and Cosbi. He was defending the honor of his people and the honor of Hashem, whereas his partner back there in Shechem, Shimon, this time was the idolater. This time he was the copulator. This time he was the one who was bringing dishonor and shame to Israel and dishonor to God's name. So you could say that fire that inspired Shimon and Levi back there in Shechem wasn't necessarily the same fire in each of the two brothers. And in this generation, that fire we see in the descendants of Levi and Pinchas. It was a fire of pure zealotry on behalf of Hashem, and the fire that was in Shimon was a corrupted fire. Now, we know that Levi followed through on what Yaakov, their father, and his blessing when he said, you're not going to get an inheritance. We know that Levi doesn't get an inheritance because they become the Levites and the Kohanim, the priests, who don't have a physical inheritance in Israel. They don't have land. They have the priesthood and those responsibilities. And Shimon, who did get a tribe in the Negev, in the southern part of Israel, and was basically absorbed and swallowed up by the tribe of Judah, who was his neighbor and who was very powerful. And Shimon kind of disappears from history. Soon after we learn about the tribal inheritance in the book of Joshua. So, a very intriguing chapter in our history. Again, this is Pinchas, the zealot who, with this one action, defended God's honor, saved Israel from this horrific plague. And then our story continues in this week's reading, and the preparations are made now for entering into the land. The tribal leaders are again named, and they will be the ones who will be responsible for leading their people, their tribes, into the land, and for taking the inheritance that will be theirs. There will be a hagrala, there will be a lottery as to where in the land of Israel each of these tribes will be expected to assume their inheritance, their tribal inheritance. And the size of that inheritance, we're told, will be according to the size population of each of the tribes. Larger tribes will get greater land, and smaller tribes will get less land. But the exact location and area will be determined by a hagrala, by a lottery, which will take place once they're in the land. Then, of course, we get to the famous, praiseworthy incident, which we will soon read about again in this week's reading, of the 5 daughters of Tzlavchad, whose names are, they are, hold on a second, I'm looking for it. I should have had this ready, I know. But their names are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcha, and Tirza. And their father had no sons. So they go to Moshe and they said, our father had no sons, he died. They're from the tribe of Menashe. And they said, we don't want to lose our inheritance. Our father deserves an inheritance, and what are we going to do? Moshe asked God, because it wasn't clear, and God said, they're right. These 5 daughters, these 5 sisters are right. Now, it's a tremendous thing what they did. They went and they stood in front of Moshe Aaron, in front of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and they asked the question in front of all the elders. Very courageous. They're very determined, and the answer was yes, they deserve the inheritance. And then, because of their inquiry, a whole set of of rules concerning what happens if someone doesn't have, a man doesn't have daughters, because the inheritance went to the sons, to the men. And we learn all about that, how throughout the generations that was to be the rule. Of course, at a certain point, the exclusivity of each of the tribal inheritances was loosened, so there was intermarriage, etc., among the tribes. But these 5 daughters very bravely and very astutely changed the course of our history, changed our Torah in a very positive way. Here's that music. Here's the end. Temple Talk. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.